Smart buildings represent an important shift in the landscape of our cities and towns across this country and the entire world. The need to create smarter businesses through the deployment of new technologies requires more efficient and better connected buildings in which to house those businesses. Here to discuss the latest developments of smart buildings planning and construction and the federal government's role in helping are Maria Vargas, Director of the Better Building Initiative of the U.S. Department of Energy, and Eric Hall, Founder and Chief Innovation Officer of Site 1001, a spinoff of J.E. Dunn Construction Company, who is joining us today via Skype in Las Vegas, Nevada. Welcome, Eric and Maria. Thank you both for joining us here on TA Now.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having me.
Just to quickly start off, Maria, why do we care about smart buildings?
Great question. We care about buildings in this country for a lot of reasons. From the Department of Energy's perspective, we spend about $200 billion a year to power our commercial buildings. We spend another $200 billion to power our manufacturing facilities. We know on average 20 to 30% of that energy is wasted. So there are tremendous opportunities to make our buildings more efficient, smarter, healthier, and more comfortable for the people who live, work, and go to school there. Another important thing about buildings is we spend about 90% of our life in buildings, so we want them to be comfortable. We want the buildings to be smart, but we also want the building owners and managers to be smart about what it means to be energy efficient and use energy wisely and make those buildings comfortable for the people that work there.
And Eric, the U.S. Green Buildings Council estimates that buildings account for 39% of CO2 emissions in the United States. What does that say about the opportunity for energy efficiency and the impact on the environment?
Well, I think anybody who's been to Las Vegas and experiences the air conditioning load as you go from the Strip to the casino understands how much energy is being consumed by buildings. My background with an undergraduate degree in architecture and then moving on into general contracting, I joined the union as soon as I graduated, and that balance of construction and architecture really helped kind of form my initial ideas when I got into the industry. As an architect and a builder, we think about the jewels that we're building. We spend 2 years building this beautiful building, and then we go on and we build the next one. I was attending a presentation in Phoenix that was being given by Sandia Laboratory as it related to overall building cost over 40 years. And as the architect and the builder, and I think that building is such an important, beautiful thing, I was just this little sliver of the pie. And when I saw how much operation and energy and personnel and maintenance costs were, I started to think about how we could make percentage improvements in that piece of the pie and really start to garner some traditional savings for the building. And as I think about being an architect on the information creation side and then being a builder on the information consumption side, we hand buildings over to people that are in the business of making widgets or providing patient care. They don't love buildings the way we do. They don't have a desire or a knowledge on how to operate them effectively. What they want is they want continuity in the building's performance, whether it means we can maintain manufacturing conditions or whether it means we're maintaining the satisfaction of the users of the building. To me, that's really what a smart building is it's a building that allows for continuity in its utilization to maximize the effectiveness of the business purpose of the structure.
Maria, what kind of programs does the Better Building Initiative have? And I'm interested particularly when you think of older buildings and retrofits and new builds. Are the programs designed specifically based on the age or type of building?
There's a whole host of resources that the Department of Energy has to help people make their buildings more energy efficient and to make sure that building owners and managers know how much energy they're using, and to take advantage of that information to improve their buildings and make them better. So there is a Better Building Solution Center that is available to anyone who's interested in using it. And let me just back up for a minute, because I think the real opportunity in buildings is technical, but it's also organizational. There are lots of barriers that people encounter when they're trying to make their buildings better, smarter, faster. And some of those barriers are, how do you organize yourself as an organization to take advantage of more energy efficient buildings? How do you make sure that the building systems are working together? How do you know how much energy your building is using? You would be surprised, maybe or maybe not, how many people I run across in my work that have no idea how much energy their building is using. And that's an important and really scary barrier to greater efficiency and smarter buildings in this country, because you can't manage what you can't measure. So as Eric pointed out, lots of times buildings are designed, built, and then the people who do the designing and building move on. So it's really important that building owners and managers understand their buildings, how much energy they're using, what the opportunity is to save. And the Better Buildings Initiative and the Department of Energy as a whole has a lot of resources. The easy way to go find those is the Better Building Solutions Center, but a lot of resources to help building owners and managers, people who are thinking about building a new building, to get the information they need to make sure that they build a building that serves the needs that they have, and then tools to run it and operate it correctly with as much efficiency as possible, so that we are saving the tens of billions of dollars a year that we can as a nation, and reducing important pollutants that never need to be created in the first place.
You lead me to another question, which is how much of that message is actually conveyed onto the tenants of buildings? And from a value proposition perspective, do you arm the building owners and developers with that information, then they use that to help market?
That's the hope, and the really good folks, the leaders in the marketplace, are doing it. Within the Better Buildings platform, we have something called the Better Buildings Challenge. We work with about 350 organizations around the country, and they really are leading the way. And leading organizations are working with their tenants, because as you can imagine, if you are in the hospitality space, you can't do it alone. You need the help of housekeepers, the people running the kitchens, all of those people is tied into your efforts to make your buildings more efficient. And so the organizations that understand how important energy is and the savings that can come, the improved comfort that can come from having a building that is well managed, are tremendous. And those folks are really engaging the whole team of people who work there, and also who work and who shop or go to school there.
Eric, thinking about the builders themselves and their mindset, how has that changed regarding smart buildings over the last 10 years or so?
I think that it's a client-driven process. Again, the way the architect and the builder go into it with a 2-year life cycle, and the expectation is there's going to be an operation and maintenance manual that's handed over at the end of the project. And I know, as someone who's compiled those manuals, that they're not helpful at the facility level. You know, there's just a regurgitation of mass information, which keeps you from being able to really find the answer. But I would say the biggest change is that architects and builders have conversations with clients today, especially in the commercial architecture side, that deal with total cost of operation. We're no longer, at least we see fewer clients that are as interested in winning the Architectural Digest Award for their new corporate headquarters as they are in perhaps achieving a LEED Platinum certification or a LEED Gold certification, which gives them the assurances that their building was designed with energy efficiency and performance in mind. And I think that some of what the US GBC is doing with regard to the LEED education and the LEED certification and accreditation that we have going on, I think those messages are being driven by builders, balanced by architects. Energy conservation practices at time can be contrary to the performance of what the building's function is. But if we think about it with foresight and planning, which is what we're paid to do, we can get it going down the right path, and not thinking about this building as a 24-month experience, but thinking about it as a 40 to 50-year experience.
This is a question that I'd like to offer to both of you, but start with Eric perhaps. What type of information or connectivity technologies are key to making a building smart? So if you think of, in our industry, in the information communications technology industry, cabling and small cells and repeaters, does it go beyond that?
Yeah, as I said before, I believe that a smart building at its foundation provides operational continuity. What that is varies from building to building. But if you think about where we spend our money in a building, we spend it on maintaining assets, we spend it on outside service providers, we spend it on energy consumption. All of those things have to be coordinated in a manner that the building is working as one. As Maria said earlier, it can't be, I always used to say, efficiency in operations is not a decision that's made in the boardroom. It is achieved in the basement by operations, by your facility management team. And if you don't have buy-in across that spectrum, it begins with a building operator saying, I want what's best. I want to stop thinking of my building as simply a 17% overhead number that I plug into my budget. I want to get it down to 8. I want to get it down to 6 or 7. But if we don't know what's going in our building, we can't do that. As a designer of mechanical systems, I'll pick on that a little bit. your chiller and your HVAC air handling unit and your condensing pumps and your evaporating cooling tower, those are very rarely all made by the same manufacturer. And every bit of relationship between those assets within the performance group is important. And when you think about the building automation system or the building control system, it's logging data to compare against set points. It's not thinking about how is this performance affected by a Grundfos pump versus a Bell and Gossett pump in a climate like Phoenix versus in a climate like Minneapolis. And so you take all of those parameters together, and the focus of what we're trying to do is not just simply regurgitate thermostat values, but ask questions about the building. You know, the building will never be a robot. We'll never have buildings that have so many sensors that they can completely run themselves. I argue that if your building becomes a robot, it'll jump off its foundation and go fight Godzilla, because that's a lot cooler than being a building. But we will have this human interface where we're always taking this information and we're getting humans to turn valves, to flip switches, to maintain continuity in the building. And this isn't about as much does my air handler last 15 years instead of 13 years. It's did we have to close the building for 2 weeks while we did a sewage remediation on a backed up pipe that was dumping out 800 gallons per minute over the weekend. So being able to monitor those things, quickly triage those things, and then be able to better forecast catastrophic conditions, that's what really provides continuity in a building. And we're at a unique point now where improved connectivity as well as affordable measuring and metering devices allow us to, at an affordable level, go into buildings and get the pertinent data that we need to ensure that it operates in its best possible manner.
And Maria, just that merger of technologies and that contribute to a smart building. In your field, in your work at the DOE, do you speak of specific technologies in particular?
No, I think it really, I'm going to echo some of the things that Eric brought up. I think it's really this move and mindset change from systems to the building as a whole, right? So you really have to understand that if you have more energy efficient lighting, the heat load that's coming for your lighting has to be less met by your HVAC unit. So this idea that the systems interact, interplay, and have an influence on one another is really important. So understanding the building as a whole, where we're going with sensors, wireless metering, all sorts of things that can give us improved information real time about our buildings is really what's driving this interest in smart buildings. A building is built to accomplish a goal. A hotel is designed to house folks overnight. A school is housed to teach children. And so taking and understanding the systems in a building and make sure that they're aligned and doing what they're designed to do is really, really important. And I agree with Eric, you need both the boardroom and the boiler room, but you do need the boardroom because
Yes.
What we know at the Department of Energy is it is too hard for those folks that work on building issues day in and day out to fight upstream and get management involved. It's really important to have management's buy-in, interest, and understanding that building energy use is a priority because it accomplishes fundamental business objectives, whatever your business may be.
If I could follow that up, Maria's exactly right. You have to have buy-in at the corporate level because you need the tools to do this. We know that just building a building doesn't make it smart. So if we're going to provide the folks in the boiler room with the information they need to run it, it's going to take tools. So that cooperation is paramount. The other thing as it relates to building systems, I like to think of a building, whether I like to or not, I do. I think of a building as a person. It sweats in the wall. It gets hot. It gets cold. Some days it smells better than other days. Sometimes they didn't zip their coat and water got in. But you can't look at your ear to find out if you have a problem with your toe. But if we don't have the sensors in our building, that is in essence what we're doing. I always like to make the analogy that what would you tell me about a 1982 Yugo that had no odometer and a fresh paint job? You'd say, I'm scared of that. But that's what we do with buildings. Whatever is going on under the skin, we just throw a nice fresh coat of EFIS on it, throw some tile down, and sell it. And the owner or the investment never really understands what they've got. And so to be able to have measurement and verification within our systems at a minimum, that's where we start. With measurement and verification, we can start making decisions. From that point, we can start to grow the intelligence of the building based on where are our pinch points and where is our opportunity to greatest reduce our greatest reduction in operating cost, excuse me.
And Eric, how has the relationship between the IT needs of buildings and facilities managers changed? Are there tensions between those two groups?
Well, I'll tell you that there's always tension between IT and star, whoever you're talking about. I need this. Do you really need that? So IT at its heart is really about maintaining standards with a minimal investment. As it relates to facility management, back in 2010, when we expected facility managers to carry iPads to have access to building control data, the issue of Wi-Fi coverage within a hospital became an interesting discussion, and it was one of the things I took for granted. I just imagine I'm going to have a connected app wherever I go. Well, there's been so much more. There is now an understanding in the architecture, construction, and IT design side that areas without coverage in a building is not really an acceptable term anymore. And we're starting to get to that as it relates to cellular networks with regard to roaming and the expansion of the infrastructure. So there is an expectation that IT is providing the information so that the traditional FM folks can have access to it. But the traditional FM folk is a 50 to 55, 60-year-old man who's approaching retirement, who has a lot of cardinal tribal knowledge about the building in his head. As those folks transition out, we're going to get in a generation of workers that are more gamified, are willing to interact with us, and there's going to be an expectation. There's going to be an expectation with our new building technicians that say, how am I supposed to do my job without information? And I think that we are starting to align those things so that as we deal with the labor shortages and the specifics of the demographic shift, that we are providing tools that we can actually make buildings better through a reduction in the number of FTEs that require to operate them.
Let's talk, if you could, just for a minute about the challenges of making existing buildings smart. And I'll ask Eric this question initially. As a layman from a smart building perspective, I have a vision in my mind that a new build would be smarter than a retrofitted existing build. Is that true, or is it somewhat true?
I think a more accurate correlation would be that a newer building provides more data points, more connected equipment, more robust building automation and building management systems. So by their nature, having more data is going to allow you to have a smarter building. I believe, and maybe this is my architect inside of me, but I believe that true building intelligence, if you really want to optimize it, has to be a planning exercise prior to construction. As we've seen how construction has changed, 20 years ago, low voltage systems were not very common in buildings. Today, you have multiple low voltage systems. Those low voltage systems allow us to provide wired or sometimes wireless information to more sensors, which allow you to get more information. In the research and development lab in Bend, one of the things that we're working on is a modular prefabricated wet wall that is installed during a renovation, where you strip the sheetrock out, you install this modular steel stud that has all of your plumbing connections with all of the leak detection, automated valves, solenoids, all built into the wall. You slip it into place just like you would bolt down your toilet or bolt your lav on. You make your hot water supply, your cold water supply, and your waste connection. And you've taken 85 connections per bathroom and reduced it to 3 on site, all while providing the electronic infrastructure inside the wall. We used to joke that when we first built our mock-up of our wet wall, we couldn't find anybody to wire our toilet. And it illustrated a point that we're starting to cross over the traditional trade boundaries here. And as I remember being an architect and a superintendent, I could not have a plumber sweating copper and then logistically schedule an electrician to come behind and wrap that. But when we take these off-site and we think about them as modular concepts, we're able to do that work at a higher quality environment, and we're able to deliver it to the job, accelerate construction, and ultimately have that intelligence built into the wall around our key, most strategic risk areas, which are why we focused on the wet wall initially, was to be able to illustrate savings on a property and casualty side.
And Maria, just sort of a nuance on that same question. When we think about the Better Building Initiatives programs, older pre-existing buildings, new builds, how do the programs address that?
Well, let's just talk about a couple things going on here. And I think one thing that's really important is to recognize that most of the carbon emissions and energy we're going to use in buildings over the next decade or so are going to come from existing buildings. That's really where we're going to have to pay attention. So I think your question to Eric is a really appropriate one, and it's one of the things that we're grappling a lot with at the Department of Energy is how do you make existing buildings more energy efficient? How do you make sure that they take advantage of renewable sources of energy and those kinds of things? Because that's really where the opportunity to save energy is. So there's a lot of things that we need to focus on. And through Better Buildings, we're working on that. More on that in a minute. But I think the other thing that I just wanted to weigh in on with your question to Eric was the expectation is that a new building would be smarter and better and faster, and we're not always seeing that. Lots of times, and let's go back to the conversation we were having with Eric in the beginning where people come build a building and then leave. I think that new buildings, surprisingly, are often a lot more inefficient than you would expect or hope. So I think it's very important as we pay attention and think about the buildings, and if we're building owners or managers or are running an organization that is thinking about building new buildings, that we pay attention, because a new building is not necessarily more energy efficient than the one we're currently in. And so I think that's a really important point. And so across those kinds of issues, whether you're trying to upgrade an existing building or whether you're thinking about new construction, there's lots of resources that we offer at the Department of Energy. And what's really important, I think, about what we're doing through Better Buildings is that while the Department of Energy, through its national labs and through the research prowess that we have, contributes a lot to the discussion, I would argue of equal interest is some of the work that we're profiling that our partners are doing. So partners like Best Buy and Macy's and Starbucks and Walmart and the Cleveland Clinic and school districts around the country are all teeing up as partners in the Better Buildings Challenge solutions that have worked for them. How did they overcome a technical issue that they were facing, or how did they overcome an organizational barrier? And the chances are very good that organizations share more than they think. And so one nice thing about the Better Building Solutions Center is you can type in the problem you're having and see who else solved that problem, whether it be organizational, technical, or financial, and see how someone else solved that problem in the hopes that we're leapfrogging this country forward. Because as we've been talking about today, the interest in smart buildings and have buildings that better deliver on what it is we're asking them to do needs to happen far more quickly to take advantage of the energy and pollution savings. But the financial rationale for doing that is really compelling as well.
Eric, when you think about the TIA membership, and I discussed that at the top, it's actually prior to this episode. TIA represents information communications technology builders, so from chips to subcomponents, components to big box manufacturers to carriers of various stripes. What is it that the ICT industry can offer the smart buildings industry or the construction industry?
That makes me think back to when I became a superintendent of my first construction job, and I went into a trailer with a laptop computer and an ISDN connection and thought I was going to do something. It's interesting when you think about how much connectivity and bandwidth has changed over the last decade and a half. And that connectivity, that signal penetration within the building, that stuff is very important, and it enables a proliferation of measurement and verification devices to be installed with that level of connectivity. One of the other things that we're also very interested in is there is a security concern by most building operators about building management systems and their vulnerability to outside attacks. One of the things that we're interested in doing is building a parallel communication network via a cellular type network that doesn't interact directly with the internet and the firewall protections that a corporate entity would be concerned about. And so as we can get more cellular penetration into buildings, as we can be more dependent on that, we're working on local services that reduce the amount of bandwidth and the transmission size. But as we get, what we're finding is more prolific cell phone coverage is allowing us to use more and more connected devices. And the more devices we have, the more information we have to make good, intelligent decisions about our buildings.
We think, Maria, about the need to educate, and you mentioned the Solution Center, the Better Buildings Initiative. What is the exact name of that?
That's okay, the Better Building Solution Center.
Better Buildings Solution Center, thank you. And I'm hearing from this conversation from both of you that need to educate.
Yep.
And from your perspective, one could go there and learn a compendium of information, I would assume.
Yep.
that does address some of the more technical issues that our members would certainly find helpful as well. And Eric, from your perspective, you think of purely from a building and construction view, is there a forum or industry fora that exist that you would recommend or that you know of in the industry itself?
Again, the AGC, the American General Contractors, the Association of General Contractors, is always very prevalent in this. We're seeing a lot of technology that is proliferating in the field as it relates to not only safety, but the fact that we exchange information in a digital format now. We don't have guys running around the job site with rolls of plans under their arms anymore. There is an expectation that you can have access to a 300-page PDF file anywhere in the mud hole. So with that, the proliferation of cellular services, what we call mobile hotspots, where we have mobile cell towers that we would set up on jobs based on concrete configurations to ensure coverage, that is where the future is going. We can't go back to an antiquated communication style. And everything we're talking about here, from how the architect talks to the contractor to how the contractor talks to the building owner, is about communication. And I really see that being the big improvement.
Well, and just from the Department of Energy's perspective, one thing we've seen at the Better Buildings is the power of peer networking, right? So whether you do it in a vertical trade, whether hospitals are talking to hospitals, whether you're talking to people that live in the same community you live in, but the power of sharing is really important. The other thing that we are finding is that true leaders, and I would argue this is true in life, but the true leaders in this space are people who know they don't want to be the smartest person in the room, that they want to be working with people who are pushing the envelope and trying new things, and they always want to be in meetings where they're learning from others. And so that's why the Better Building Solutions Center does what it does, which is sharing solutions and really encourages the peer networking, because that's really important. And your community, the ICT community, is going to be pivotal to our ability to move forward. So it's having those discussions, making sure that the information is getting to people and that there is an exchange of information, experience, strategy, and success for buildings, building owners, and managers. That's going to be key moving forward, because I agree with Eric, the workforce in buildings is going to shift. We're already seeing that. We know, I hear a lot from building owners and managers that workforce and a skilled workforce is one of the big issues that is facing us in the future. So it's the ability to have people that understand these issues, that understand the opportunities that come with improved technologies and everything that means, and how to deploy that in a building whose real goal is to help us do what we are trying to do in that building. So lots of exciting stuff going on, not without its challenges, but there's lots of exciting things that we can do if we work together.
I want to thank Marie and Eric for joining us here today at TIA Now. Clearly, smart buildings is a topic that TIA will closely follow over the coming months and is an important part of our technology roadmap at TIA throughout the beginning of 2018 and beyond. Thank you to our audience as well for joining us here today. So long for now.